The silence in the house was as sharp as hunger itself. It wrapped around me, heavy and unyielding, pressing against my chest like an unseen force. My two children, Emily and Jack, huddled together near the lifeless radiator, their frail bodies curled up for warmth that didn't exist. Their clothes were thin, their faces pale. Emily's lips were dry and cracked, and Jack's small stomach let out a low, pitiful growl as he drifted into restless sleep. My heart shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. There is no pain greater for a mother than watching her children fall asleep with empty stomachs. Michael, my husband, lay sprawled on a worn-out mattress in the other room, lost in the depths of intoxication. The sharp, sour scent of alcohol clung to him like a second skin, filling the air with the staleness of regret that carried no promise of change. He was there, but not really. His body remained, but the man I once loved had long since faded, leaving behind only a ghost wrapped in flesh. There was no warmth of a father, no presence of a husband, just a hollow existence. We had nothing left to eat. The refrigerator stood in the corner, humming faintly, but it was nothing more than an empty, useless shell. The pantry shelves mocked me with their bareness. I opened every cabinet, every drawer, hoping against reason that something had been overlooked. A forgotten can, a stale crust of bread. But hope doesn't fill an empty stomach. That night, I stared at my children's fragile forms, their breath shallow, their bodies weakened by hunger. I could not wait any longer. I could not sit in the dark, praying for miracles that never came. Michael had given up on us, but I would not. At dawn, I pulled on my thin sweater, slipped my feet into my worn shoes, and stepped out into the biting cold. The streets were empty, bathed in the gray sorrow of a morning that had yet to awaken. The air was sharp against my skin, but it was nothing compared to the weight pressing on my soul. My feet carried me forward with a purpose I didn't want to acknowledge, toward the small corner store down the block. I told myself I didn't know what would happen next, but deep inside I did. The pavement was cracked beneath my steps, mirroring the fractures inside me. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I had no money, not a single coin to offer. But money didn't matter anymore. What mattered were Emily's hollow cheeks and Jack's fragile little frame, curled beneath a threadbare blanket. The sound of his hunger haunted me more than any nightmare ever could. The store's door creaked as I pushed it open, the small bell above jingling, an almost mocking chime of normalcy. Mark, the store owner, leaned behind the counter, flipping through a magazine. When his eyes lifted to meet mine, a slow, knowing smile stretched across his lips. There was no kindness in it, only something sharp, something hungry. My skin crawled, but I swallowed my discomfort. I had no choice. I wandered the aisles, pretending to browse, though my mind was a blank slate of fear and desperation. My hands trembled as I picked up a loaf of stale bread, a small carton of milk, and a few eggs. Essentials. Enough to fill small bellies, at least for a little while. As I carried them to the counter, my heart pounded so violently I could feel it in my throat. Mark scanned the items slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. "Tough times, huh, Lisa?" he mused, his voice dripping with false sympathy. I forced a weak, hollow smile, fingers brushing against the empty fabric lining of my pocket. My pride burned like acid in my throat. I don't have the money right now," I whispered, barely able to say the words. Mark leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter. His smile widened, but it wasn't warm. It was something else, something dark, something predatory. "I figured as much," he murmured. "But we can work something out." The words struck like a slap, cold and cruel in their meaning. I didn't respond, couldn't respond. But deep inside, I already knew what he meant. My hands clenched around the grocery bag, imagining Emily's eyes lighting up at the sight of real food, Jack's tiny hands reaching eagerly for a slice of bread. I nodded. No words. Just a single silent nod. Mark's grin widened as he motioned for me to follow him. My legs felt like lead, my body moving forward despite the war raging inside me. The small storage room was dimly lit, cluttered with boxes and the faint scent of dust and old produce. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound deafening in its finality. My heart screamed, but I made no sound. I wasn't there. Not really. My mind drifted to Emily's laughter, to Jack's sleepy smile. I clung to those memories as Mark's hands found me, as his breath filled the space where my dignity once lived. When it was over, I pulled my clothes back into place with trembling fingers. Mark handed me a plastic bag filled with food, as if it were some kind of reward. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I walked out of the store, the cold morning air hitting my face, but it wasn't enough to cleanse me of the filth clinging to my skin. The bag of groceries was heavier than it should have been, as if it carried the weight of what I had lost. Tears blurred my vision, but I wiped them away angrily. There was no room for tears. Not anymore. When I stepped through the door of our apartment, Emily and Jack ran to me, their small faces lighting up with joy at the sight of food. "Mommy, you got milk," Emily squealed, her voice bright with innocent delight. I forced a smile, my heart breaking all over again. But their happiness made it bearable. Their full stomachs would silence the echoes of my shame, at least for a little while. That day I learned something. Pride doesn't feed hungry children, and a mother's love isn't always wrapped in warmth and comfort. Sometimes, it's hidden beneath bruises you can't see. The first step was the hardest, but it was only the beginning. When I walked out of that back room, something inside me shattered. I didn't know if it was my pride, or the last remnants of the woman I used to be. And as I stood there, in the cold morning air, I realized something else. Hunger always comes back. And when it does, it doesn't ask for permission. The days blurred together, each one heavy with the weight of hunger and silence. The house was still, save for the occasional rustling of thin blankets, or the quiet murmurs of dreams spoken in sleep. My children Emily and Jack lay curled near the cold radiator, their small bodies pressed together, seeking warmth that didn't exist. Their cheeks were hollow, their skin pale. Emily's lips cracked more with each passing day, and Jack's stomach groaned in protest, demanding something I could not give. Michael was as he always was, lost in an alcohol-induced haze, sprawled on the stained mattress in the other room. The stench of liquor clung to him, seeping into the very walls of our crumbling home. His breath was shallow, his face slack, but it was not the peaceful sleep of a man at rest. It was the empty, heavy slumber of a man who had long since surrendered to his demons. There was no father left in him, no husband, just a hollow shell, a shadow of what once was. The cupboards were bare. The refrigerator hummed softly, mocking me with its emptiness. I opened every drawer, every cabinet, searching for something, anything. But all I found was the suffocating truth. Hope did not fill empty stomachs. Prayers did not put food on the table. That morning, as dawn crept through the cracked blinds, I made a choice. I pulled on my thin sweater, slipped into my worn shoes, and stepped out into the biting cold. The streets were silent, the sky a dull, lifeless gray, as if even the sun was too ashamed to rise. My body moved forward, guided by something heavier than will. There was no hesitation this time, no lingering doubt. I knew what awaited me at home. 2 hungry faces, 2 fragile bodies. My children did not need my pride. They needed food. The bell above the corner store's door jingled as I stepped inside, its sound sharp in the quiet. Mark looked up from behind the counter, his lips curling into a slow, knowing smile. It was as if he had been expecting me. And maybe he had. There were no words this time, no awkward attempts to pretend. Just a look, an unspoken understanding. We had formed a silent agreement, one that neither of us needed to discuss. He provided what my children needed, and I gave him what he wanted. When I left that morning, a bag of groceries hung from my trembling fingers. The weight of it pulled at me, heavier than it should have been. My heart felt the same, burden worn. But the tears did not come. Maybe I had learned how to hold them back. Or maybe I simply had none left. The silence did not last long. A few days later, as I walked past the neighborhood bakery, I heard my name. "Lisa, wait up." The voice belonged to Hassan the baker. He was older than Mark, with tired eyes and flour-dusted hands. He stepped outside, wiping his palms on his apron, his expression carefully crafted with concern. But I recognized the hunger in his gaze. It was the same as Mark's. "I heard you've been having a rough time," he said. "Maybe I can help." My stomach twisted, but my body did not waver. I knew what he meant. The offer was wrapped in false kindness, laced with something unspoken. My heart sank. But my children's hunger did not care about my dignity. So I followed him inside. Hassan was rougher, less patient. His hands were not gentle, not that I expected them to be. But I was not there, not really. My mind had learned to float, to drift to a place far from the cold reality of the moment. I focused on Emily's laughter, on Jack's sleepy grin, on the way they curled beside me at night, blissfully unaware of the darkness I carried. When it was over, Hassan handed me a bag filled with bread, pastries, even fresh fruit. I clutched it tightly, my fingers digging into the paper, as if holding onto something solid would anchor me. My legs felt weak, my chest hollow. But when I stepped through the door of our apartment and saw my children's faces light up, the weight lessened. Just a little. And so it continued. Mark. Hassan. Then Vinny the butcher. Mehmet the gas delivery man. They all knew. The neighborhood whispered. But no one said anything to my face. I wasn't the first woman to trade her body for survival. I wouldn't be the last. It became routine, a transaction as normal as washing dishes or folding laundry. My body was currency, and I learned to spend it wisely. Sometimes there were requests, things that made my skin crawl, my stomach turn, but I did them anyway. Not for me, never for me, always for Emily and Jack. One day, Mark and Vinny asked if I would take them both at the same time. My pride screamed in protest, my body recoiled. But my mouth said, okay, because I had seen Emily's cough worsening, heard the wheeze in her breath. I had noticed Jack's shoes growing tighter, the way his little toes curled against the fabric. Love makes you do things you never thought you could. Desperation makes sure you never forget why. I lost count of the men. The shame dulled over time, like an old scar that no longer stings when touched. But the hunger never returned, not for my children. There was always food on the table, warmth in the winter, clothes that fit. They were safe. Eventually, I stopped feeling like a victim. I wasn't just being used. I was using them too. It was a transaction, plain and simple. They got what they wanted, and I got what I needed. Power in its ugliest form. And the most haunting part? I wasn't even sorry. Because regret doesn't feed hungry children. Michael remained unchanged. A ghost of a man. Trapped in his own cycle of self-destruction. He stumbled through the apartment, the scent of whiskey clinging to him like a second skin. His eyes were vacant, lost in a world I could never reach. Sometimes, when he was sober enough to notice, he would glance around the kitchen with a puzzled expression, his gaze lingering on the stocked pantry, the warm meals on the table. "Where'd this come from?" he muttered once, poking at a plate of roasted chicken like it was some great mystery. I shrugged. "Don't worry about it," I said, my voice steady, my heart silent. And he didn't, because that would have required him to care. Michael had abandoned that ability long ago, right around the time he chose the bottle over his family. There was a time when I had begged him to change, pleaded through tears, screamed through frustration. But those days were gone. Words couldn't fix what was already dead. The only thing that mattered now was Emily and Jack. Their laughter was the only thing holding me together. And as long as they were safe, as long as they were fed, nothing else mattered. The years slipped by, quiet and relentless, each one carving its mark into the lines of my face and the weight in my bones. But as time passed, I watched Emily and Jack grow, stronger, healthier, thriving in ways they never could have if I had clung to pride instead of survival. Their bellies were full, their cheeks no longer hollow with hunger. Their laughter echoed through our small home, a melody so sweet it almost made me forget the darkness that had settled in the corners of my heart. They slept soundly, unaware of the cost of their comfort. Their eyes sparkled with the carefree joy that only children truly know, untouched by the sacrifices woven into the fabric of their existence. They were warm in the winter, safe in the storm, never knowing what it had taken to keep them that way. And that, seeing them happy, untouched by the harsh reality I had endured, was my victory. Michael remained a ghost, floating through the house like an empty shell, present but never truly there. His footsteps were sluggish, his mind lost in the fog of alcohol that never seemed to lift. He never asked questions, not the ones that mattered. Sometimes, in rare moments of half-sobriety, he would glance around the dinner table, his brow creased in vague confusion. He would stare at the stocked pantry, at the fresh bread on the counter, as if trying to piece together a puzzle whose edges never quite fit. "Where did all this come from?" he mumbled once, poking at a plate of roasted chicken with unfocused eyes. I only shrugged. "Don't worry about it." And he didn't, because to ask would mean facing the truth. And Michael had long since abandoned anything resembling responsibility. The bottle was his only solace, his escape, his crutch. The life unraveling around him went unnoticed, and that was fine. His oblivion was my shield. The men came and went. Some lingered longer than others, expecting more, demanding more. But in the end, they were all the same. Means to an end. They believed they owned pieces of me, but they were wrong. My body was a currency, spent carefully, strategically. But my heart, that belonged to Emily and Jack, given to them the moment they were born. With time, I stopped feeling like a victim. I wasn't trapped, I was surviving. I wasn't just being used, I was using them too. And in that realization, I found a strange kind of power. They thought they held control, but I was the one who decided, when, where, how. I was the one who walked away with food in my bag, medicine in my hands, and my children's future secured, one transaction at a time. Michael remained the same, blind to the world I had built around him, for our children despite him. Sometimes I saw the flicker of something in his dull eyes, a fleeting moment of clarity as he stared at the life that had somehow been stitched back together despite his absence. But the alcohol always pulled him under before the realization could fully take hold. And that was for the best. I never looked for love again. Love was a luxury, and I had traded mine long ago. What I had now was purpose. A reason to wake up each morning, even when my heart felt like stone. A reason to keep going, even when the weight of my choices threatened to pull me under. My children were happy. They were safe. That was all that mattered. So am I sorry? No, not even a little. I did what I had to do. I made choices most people couldn't fathom, faced truths they would never survive. And if given the chance to do it all over again, I would. Without hesitation. Because I am a mother. And a mother's love doesn't come with conditions. It comes with scars.